guys, this is part 3 of my Brio tutorial video series. Now that we've got our actors set up the way we want them and our environment the way we want it, we are finally going to get into the bread and butter, which is posing. Today we have our lovely friend Urianger here to help us out. First thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to freeze your actor. You can see right now that he's doing this sort of subtle idle movement. And when you're posing and getting into really specific stuff, this idle movement tends to be a little bit of a pain. So we have a couple options here. We can either freeze him with the vanilla Gpose settings, with this button here that says disable and enable all emotion. Or the other thing we can do is we can, underneath this posing tab, or on this posing tab rather, we can open up advanced posing. Open this tab here, and we can freeze character. So now that we have him frozen, I'm going to talk to you about a few different ways to pose your character. We're going to start with the most difficult way of posing, which is just posing everything manually and from scratch. And from there, we're going to work backwards towards some shortcuts and easier methods. So the first thing that you can do when you are posing manually is you can turn on this overlay here, this button here that says open overlay right beneath posing, eyeball button all the way on the left. And when you turn this on, what you can see is that you've now got this skeleton overlaid onto Urianger's body. There are a lot of bones here, and I don't even have all of them checked. In this little overlay window here, we have this bone filter button. As you can see, I don't even have most of the bones for the face checked because, as you can see, there are a lot. But for the purposes of this video, we are only going to be talking about posing bodies today, so I'm going to uncheck all of these boxes. And that makes it a little simpler to see what we're doing. So we're going to make Urianger wave to the camera, just something simple and quick. So we're going to select his forearm here, and when you do that, you can see that we're going to get this gizmo ball over this joint. For posing bodies, 99.9% of the time what you're going to be doing is rotating joints rather than moving them on a linear axis. So you can use this gizmo ball to rotate his arm up and down, or you can go some unnatural ways and go side to side. You can also twist his arm. I tend to find this gizmo ball a little difficult to grab, so what we can do instead is on this overlay window, this top middle button, toggle transform window, will bring us up an exterior gizmo ball. I find this a lot simpler, a little easier to navigate. And then down here we also have our axis buttons. As I said, you're not really going to be using these a lot for posing bodies, but just to demonstrate what they do, you can also move body parts on the linear axis. As you can see, that's pretty unnatural looking, so we're not going to really be doing that. So we're going to reset his pose here. If you find that this is a little difficult to see what you're doing, these lines and circles are making it a little tricky, you have another option here. So we're going to turn off this overlay, and instead, on this posing tab, we're going to open this advanced posing window again. This is my preference for posing. As you can see, this window is a little large, kind of covers up a big chunk of your screen depending on the size of your UI, and this is as small as you can make it. But what you can see here is that you have this body that is representing Urianger. So rather than having all those bones overlaid on his body, we can select his forearm in this window and move it here. I just tend to find this a lot easier. It makes it easier to see what I'm doing. But your mileage may vary. Whatever works easiest for you is the best choice. So the next thing I want to talk to you about in this specific window is linking parts. So what we are going to do here is we're going to link both of Urianger's arms so that they move in tandem. So we're going to select his right forearm. We have this button here. On the left, it looks like a little chain link, so we line through it. That's because there is no link set up right now. So when we click this, this changes to link copy. Now we can click what we want to link it to, which is his left forearm. Now we're going to go back to the right, and you can see that this still says link copy. And when we move these, we are moving them in tandem. I don't tend to do this a lot for moving bodies because I don't tend to find that perfect symmetry looks very natural most of the time. But Again, your mileage may vary, whatever works for you. And then what you can also do is you can link things mirrored. So again, we're going to take his right forearm. We're going to click this button twice now until it says link mirror. We're going to link this to his left forearm. Go back to the right. And now you can see we are moving in opposite directions. Now the last detail I want to touch on here is you can see that there are a lot of seemingly redundant joints listed on this body. For the shoulders, we have his upper arm, his shoulder, and his clavicle. This is going to take some trial and error to get used to, a little bit of practice. But say, for example, I want to put Urianger's arm way up over his head. If I select his arm and move it way up over his head like this, you can tell it seems a little unnatural. That doesn't look quite right. So I'm going to undo that. And instead we can start playing with all three of these joints and sort of move them a little bit at a time to make things look a little more natural. This is, yes, tedious, yes, tricky, and not always terribly intuitive, but you will get the hang of it with a little practice. We also have some other redundant joints such as the forearm and elbow, the hand and wrist, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. So as you can see, if you bend, whoops, we're still linked. We're going to unlink. Then if you bend Urianger's forearm all the way up this, you can see that his elbow joint starts to look a little funny. I specifically chose Urianger here because his armbands really help demonstrate the way that bodies move and that they don't tend to be terribly natural looking. So if we now select this elbow joint, we can move this in a similar direction. And it won't always look completely natural, but it is definitely helpful to sort of play with these joints if they're looking a little odd. We also have the hand, which moves your hand, of course, and then the wrist, which tends to look a little funny if you bend it that way, but it can be really helpful for turning, twisting. And again, this is just something that you're going to have to learn to play with and experiment and see what looks natural. Now, of course, if you ever mess up, make a mistake, no big deal. You've got these undo buttons up here at the top. We can undo several steps. I'm not sure exactly how many steps you can undo, but it goes pretty far. As you can see, I can undo pretty much all the way back to the beginning here. Or alternatively, if you really have completely messed something up, you really are just wanting to start with a clean slate, you've got your reset pose button here. These buttons are also present on the main Brio window. You've got undo, redo, and reset here. So now that we know the basics of posing, I'm just going to show you a brief time lapse of me getting Urianger into a pose, so you can just sort of see what this looks like. Now that we have Urianger posed the way that we want him, I am going to show you our first shortcut for posing, which is importing pre-made poses. There are a lot of places you can get pre-made poses, such as 14 Mod Archive, that is xivmodarchive.com. There's a ton of pre-made poses on there. There is absolutely no shame in using exclusively pre-made poses. You know, manual posing is tedious, difficult, takes a lot of practice. If you're wanting to just jump in, go find some pre-made poses and slap them on your character, and I'm going to show you how. So for the purposes of this video, I am going to be using the pose that I just made, so I will show you how to export that and then load it onto another actor. So with Urianger selected here on the Brio window, we're going to go underneath this posing tab and click Export Pose. This is going to open up a file explorer. As you can see, I have a couple poses here saved on my desktop. I'm going to overwrite this one, but you can name it anything you want. So this one's going to be saved as Urianger Pose. So now we're going to bring in an additional actor. Rather than using my warrior light, we're going to bring in Ariage's lovely husband, Thancred. I bring in Thancred because I want to show you a little bit about poses, pre-made poses, and size differences in actors. So the first thing that we're going to do when we're importing a pose is we're going to see a few options here. You have your checkbox here for freeze actor on import. I almost always have that checked. It just does a little bit of the work for you, but I did show you how to freeze those actors earlier. You can import as body, import as expression, and import with options. So the first thing I'm going to do is import as body so I can show you why I don't generally use this option. So importing is going to bring up this import poses window. You're going to click this browse for file button, find where you saved that pose earlier, and double click it. Now you can see that Thancred has achieved this pose. However, he has grown quite a bit and doesn't quite look himself. That's because when you're importing as a body, all of those bones are also going to be in the same position as Ariage's bones. So because he is generally longer and taller than Thancred, importing as body has stretched him out to match where Ariage's bones are. So since we don't like how this looks, we're going to reset his pose. Move it back over here. And instead, we are going to import with options. So these options here are under this gear. As you can see, we have unchecked all of our face options. And so we are just importing the body, head, hair, legs. Tail does not apply to Thancred, but it does apply to Gpose. Hands, clothes, weapons. Don't worry about IDCS, that is a mod thing, etc., etc. We're going to make sure that this is only set to rotation. We're not going to check the position or scale boxes. Now that we have our options set up the way we want, we're going to import with options. We're going to do this again. Now, as you can see, we have achieved this pose without stretching Thancred out like taffy. This is really important to note between different races in Final Fantasy XIV. Obviously, a pose made for a tall Elzen is going to look a little odd on a Lalafell even with those options selected. So we're going to bring in our good friend Cryo here as well. Turn our camera so we can see her. And with those options selected, I'm going to import this pose again. And as you can see, it doesn't quite look perfect. It's not bad, but it needs some adjustments. So this is something to keep in mind when you're using pre-made poses. You can try any pose on any size. Usually on XIV Mod Archive, it'll tell you this pose was made for whatever race. Try it anyway, even if it doesn't match your character's race. A lot of the time, it's just a matter of making some simple adjustments. So now that we know about loading pre-made poses, I am also going to talk to you about another shortcut, which is using emotes as a base for your pose. So we are left with Thancred here. I'm going to reset his pose back to normal. And we're going to go down to this animation control tab here at the bottom. We have a few buttons here. We have freeze physics. What this does is this freezes your clothes and your hair from blowing in the wind. Not relevant when you're inside, obviously. And then you also have another option for freezing your actors under this tab here. You can freeze them all at once, unfreeze them all at once, etc. Playing and stopping all animations at once is not really relevant here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to this top right search button. We want to make Thancred sit on the ground. So we're going to type in sit. As you can see, we have a couple options for sit, which is to sit on a chair, and we also have sit on ground. You've got emote-based intro, so if we click that, you're going to see that this is going to repeat the intro to that emote over and over. So what we want instead is the emote-based standard. That will put Thancred on the ground and leave him there. You can see that he's sort of doing a little bit of idle bob here, so we can pause that to freeze him again. As you can see though, underneath this search option, there are a ton of emotes. There are all the emotes that you can apply to your character outside of Gpose. There are event-specific emotes. There are just expressions. That does have more than just the expression, but there are only expressions in here. And then, besides emotes, we also have job-based attacks. So say I type Gunbreaker in here. You'll see that we have a few Gunbreaker-specific actions. So you can put these on and see that you also get the cool lighting and particle effects that come along with these actions. The unfortunate thing with this is that these lighting effects, these particle effects, do not pause when you pause the action. So you can pause him in the middle of this action, and we have this cool pose here, but unfortunately the particle effects keep going. So if you are attempting to capture these particle effects in a screenshot, you are unfortunately going to have to grab them in real time. So the next thing I want to talk about is combining more than one emote. So let's say that we want to make Thancred sit in a chair. We'll just pretend there's a chair here. And we also want to make him make an expression. So using this second search button down here below the top one, we can also type in here, say we want him to look taken aback. For this, we want to pay attention to these notes here. We want upper body chair because this is just going to affect his upper body. He's going to stay sitting in the chair. So now that we've combined these two emotes, he can stay sitting while also using that expression. We can do this a few times. We can do a few different things. Usually the second animation will only play once and not repeat, so you'll have to do it and pause it or redo it every time. But this is a great way to combine emotes, and you can play around with this to see what different effects you can come up with between these two. You can combine a lot of different emotes. Some things don't combine well, but you can experiment and just see what works for you. Say we want to make Thancred do these knees, but we want him to look angry while he's doing it. Oops, I didn't do that right. So we'll give him these knees. We will add emote blend angry here, and then he can look angry while he's doing the bee's knees. Just for a second, maybe, but I'm sure he wouldn't be happy about us forcing him to do the bee's knees, so it feels appropriate. And again, when we're done with this, we're going to reset the animation, reset his pose just for good measure. And that should sum up how to use emotes as a base for your poses. As a side note, when using emotes, there are some NPCs that don't play terribly well with emotes. For example, Alize and Alphino are technically listed in their information here as young actors. And the young actors, child actors, don't tend to want to emote. For some reason, they're just not coded to do it. So if we want to use an emote as a base for a pose for Alize, for example, what we can do is we can bring in a normal actor, an adult actor, and say that we want to make Alize bow. So let's make our other actor, our adult actor, bow, and we will pause this where we want it. We'll just pause this here. Then what we can do is what we did earlier, we can export this pose. I'm just going to save it as Brio.pose. We can hide my warrior of light here. We can bring Alize back to the start. And now we can import that same pose. Obviously you won't be able to have these odd actors do animated emotes, but if you're just using them as a base for your pose, then this is a handy little trick on how to get these actors that don't necessarily play nice to do what you want them to do. A couple other examples of these NPCs are technically Xenos will do this pose, but if you open up his advanced posing window here, you can see Xenos is not even listed as a humanoid character. That being said, he does have pretty much the same skeleton as any other humanoid actor, so generally you can import poses to him. So this should sum up the basics on how to pose bodies in Brio. Obviously, this is a fairly complex, tedious process, and like I said earlier, it absolutely does get easier and more intuitive with practice and trial and error. But also, like I said, if you're just starting out, you're getting frustrated, don't be afraid to use emotes and pre-made poses to get what you want. Again, if you guys have any questions on anything that I didn't cover or anything you'd like to see me cover in the future, let me know in the comments and I'm happy to help. Thanks for watching.